So, John, did you know that the Optimus team was considering switching the energy storage over to like a sodium chloride chemistry? But Elon balked
No.
at the idea because
Yeah.
he was afraid that that would mean Optimus would be charged with a salt in battery.
Jeez. Oh my gosh. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All coming to you with Dr. Scott Walter on a Sunday evening. Scott, Elon and Tesla have a habit of dropping these updates at the most inconvenient times. I was in the Detroit airport at like 5:30 in the morning when I saw the release by Sawyer Merritt. You, of course, are driving from Michigan down to Florida with your son. So apologies
with my actual Optimus shirt, the T-shirt on. So that's probably what triggered it.
There you go. So that was coincidence. You didn't even do that on purpose. It just happened to work out. Oh, that's pretty cool. Okay, so what we are going to do today is we are going to look at a few different things. I'm going to share the screen here. And
just so everyone knows, we're actually recording it. We're both in the same state at the same time.
That's right. The state of craziness, right?
I'm passing through Georgia right as we speak. Yes. Right. Georgia on my mind.
Yes, so there we go. So we'll go ahead and start with the video. I'm going to turn the sound off because it's got music and it'll probably be a copyright strike. So let's see if I can make this just a wee bit bigger. Okay, so let's just we'll kind of just watch it through, and then we'll look at Elon's tweets, and then we'll break it all down, because that's what we do. So we've got Elon, we've got the TeslaBot doing a very, very careful but very slow 4680 battery cell placing in trays. So Scott, why would this be useful to put?
I mean, part of it, I guess, is they probably have some areas of the production where they need to offload these little spur conveyors where you would be collecting parts that need to then be properly assembled somewhere. So it looks like they actually are using battery cells. We've seen the battery cells in a previous Optimus video, and we weren't quite sure what it was all about, whether it was just like practicing for one particular reason, which could be. But let's remember, Elon did say something about that they were doing applications in the lab that resembled stuff on the shop floor. So they were, so as you can see here, apparently is an actual production location where they probably had a human operator doing that picking and placing beforehand.
Yeah. So would that be sort of palletizing it and just carrying it someplace as a group of cells instead of individually, rather than just putting them in a bucket?
Right. If you just go back to that part of that clip, it seems a bit strange.
Let me just finish this quick. He's just walking. So anyway, he walks.
Yeah.
Whoops.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah. So if we look at that part of the clip there, we see there's already a mechanism in there. Yeah. If we get just back to it, I know it's a bit hard. There's a mechanism in the background that's already offloading from that circular conveyor belt into basically what's the outlet conveyor. And that's a very simple mechanism. I mean, it almost looks like a robot, but it's so simple, it's really not. It's a very easy mechanism to build. And you kind of wonder, well, wait a minute, if you've got a mechanism that's doing that, why can't you just come up with something that's very similar to go ahead and place it in those different tray locations? It gets a bit more complicated with the tray locations because they're different locations each time. That other one is always picking up and dropping off in the same location. It's a very small work envelope. And the other thing is, it seems like it's designed to take it from what is more or less a sealed area for the battery production to go to an outlet where now people are allowed to grab it because they're away from the mechanism. There's less likely for them to introduce impurities or anything like that into the manufacturing environment back there.
Right.
And it seems to be a pretty slow process. So either that is the actual rate that batteries are coming off the line, or there's something else kind of going on there, because it was very easy for Optimus to keep up with that. And the curious thing about it is that the tray is just on a table. And it's like, okay, so what happens when the tray is full? Where does it go? There doesn't seem to be any conveyor or anything else around there that you would push it onto to bring it over to some other storage area. So it may have actually been a very manual operation already that's there. And when done, the tray gets picked up by the operator and brought over to somewhere else and dropped off, which is probably why it hasn't been fully automated yet. Because remember, they are still working on the 4680 production line. And there's no sense optimizing these different parts of it if the line is going to be radically reconfigured. So, and maybe it's like, well, here's a real simple manual process. Right. Now, my suspicion is I would think, based on the volume of 4680s that they're producing, that they're coming off the line a little bit quicker than that. And I'm wondering because when the batteries are done, aren't they supposed to go to like a test station? They go through a bunch of
I
testing.
assume so. Yeah. 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 So that may be what
Yeah,
they're doing.
and it's
Yeah.
yeah, and it's possible that after they go through the testing, they then go through a line where they're rejected. It's like these are
Okay.
all the
Yeah.
rejects, and now we need to
Yeah.
get them out and then pull them off the line. So that's
Right.
possible why it's low volume. And if it is, it could. And if it is going off of a testing station, it could be that it comes in waves. That when they get released from the testing station, a bunch of them suddenly, whoop, you get a flood of them that you've got to offload, and then you have nothing to do for a while, and then you have it again.
Right.
And so that's the type of thing that if you're having labor, then the labor would be moving around, it would be deployed from one place to another. But that's just kind of speculation what they're going on. But as you see, they had to mimic that in the lab setting. See how easy that is to mimic? Right. They did not have to bring the entire cell up there. That's something we talked about earlier, is that they're going to be picking these things that'll be very easy to mimic in the lab. And that's the example. And it's a very easy operation. Now, you can say it's a complete waste of the bot because it only needs one arm. What's the other arm doing? It's not doing It doesn't matter. The idea is that they're starting somewhere, proving it can be done with it, finding the reliability, because that's what was pointed out by Milan and also Julian, that they're really concerned about being able to have a lot of success and reliability in these operations and in doing that kind of testing. And I'll move up to more advanced things. Of course, we don't know that, maybe when it's all done, it has to pick up the tray. Oh, so now it needs both arms.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, so people were complaining about the fact that it was only doing it with one arm, but it's not necessary to have two arms for this. So, and you just reminded me that we need to pull up Milan's post as well, which I forgot to bring up before we started, but let's go ahead.
It addresses a lot of the questions we have. Now, if we just go back to the automation, there was,
Yeah. Sorry.
You had told me that there was a reply this morning to one of our first posts of questioning. So, well, wait a minute. It's like, can't you just put a very simple robot in there to do that? And I was thinking the same thing. It's like, oh, that could easily be done with a Scara robot. I mean, there's not really anything complicated about that. You could go ahead and do it. And someone replied to it, says, well, yeah, you could put a programmer in there to do the whole thing, and it might cost you $200,000 for that very specialized application. That's not even high speed. It doesn't have to be high speed. I mean, if it was super high speed, you would throw a Scara robot there and say, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
It's one of those things like, wow, it's going to cost me that much. And if this TeslaBot's only going to cost me $20,000 or $30,000, even though if it's completely overkill as far as degrees of freedom and stuff like that, it's the bottom line.
Yeah.
It costs less, easier to implement, or we will go with that solution. So in the end, the bottom line is the bottom line. And why you may choose one thing over another, even though it does not seem to be the perfect fit, because it's just going to be cheaper. And in some cases,
let's also say that this is temporary. Let's also say this is temporary.
Yeah.
Like what it's doing only needs to be done while they're ramping this up, which means that you don't want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and create a custom designed piece of kit to solve the problem, and then only to have it not be important in another couple of months.
Yeah, so if you look in the video, you will see there's a mechanism in the background that is already doing very simple pick and placing from the circular conveyor onto the outlet conveyor. And that mechanism is not going that fast. You can see it's very simple. And you might wonder, well, why can't we go ahead and do the similar thing for offloading from the output conveyor to the tray? It seems like you could build something also just as easily and wouldn't have a whole lot of cost and wouldn't be overly complex. You really only need 2 or 3 degrees of freedom to be able to do that. And part of it could be that at the end of the day, it may actually cost a lot more than you think to be able to pull that off. You could use some off-the-shelf components like a ScaraBot that would be able to do it, that would be a lot faster if you need it, but it seems like it doesn't need to be all that fast, so that means a human, in that case, is able to keep up with it. And at the end of the day, if you haven't finished the overall automation of the battery line, you don't know what the end of the line is going to end up looking like. It's probably going to change radically. So if you start putting in hard automation too soon, you're just going to have to tear it out and replace it. And it seems like right now they've decided not to automate that part of the line because, remember step 5, don't optimize too soon.
Exactly.
It's probably already a manual operation because the throughput rate seems to be pretty low. Now, I'm not sure why the throughput rate is low, whether it's because that's a line where they may be rejecting cells that are just coming out of a test area. And it may be also something that is not continuous operation. It may be that it comes in fits and starts depending upon whether it's going into a test area, and then when they come out of the test area, suddenly you have a bunch of rejects that move through there that you need to move off. The extra degrees of freedom for Optimus could also be is like, what happens to that red box when it's full?
Right.
What do you think, John?
Right.
Where does it go?
I assume he has to pick it up and move it somewhere. So
where? I don't even see where. You know, usually you expect that to be on a conveyor that's going to get carried off somewhere else or on top of a mobile robot or something else. But it's like, whoa, wait a minute, it looks like when he's done, he's supposed to pick it up and move it over to some other place in the background that we can't see. So it could be that when it's all done, it needs both arms and it needs the legs at the same time. So for that one operation, you only need one arm, but it doesn't mean you're not going to need the other limbs later on.
Right. At the very least, to pick up the tray. I mean, because you're going to need both arms for that. So,
yes.
And quite honestly, even if I was a human and I was trying to optimize my motion until my arm got tired, it would make much more sense to do one arm rather than pick it up with the left transfer and put it in. That doesn't seem like as efficient a motion.
And again, we were talking. Optimus might have a right-handed bias.
Yeah, I think so. Well, you know, the teleoperators, we're going to get to that in just a minute, but they're, you know, 90% of the population is right-handed. So there's going to probably be a tendency for it to be somewhat right-handed. But yeah, so you can see what it's doing, and you can see that the relatively simple robot over here. But I think the idea here is that it's not just pick and place, but it's pick and place plus move it, plus potentially put it somewhere else. Plus the placement has got to be very, very refined. So you would have to have a more sophisticated robot to be able to sense exactly where it could place each one of those things. And if it was ever off, it wouldn't have error correction. So, you know, in argument against the, like, why not just build a robot to do this? It's like, well, yeah, that's great, but it could cost, what were you saying? Somewhere around $200,000 to install.
Well, there was a reply to a reply to your post, kind of questioning, well, why not go ahead and put that in there, which was a perfectly valid reply, because I was thinking the same thing. It's like, oh, wait a minute, why don't they have a stereo robot going in there, which is very easy? And someone replied that even that piece of kit in the back that's doing that could end up, by the time it's all engineered out, everything costs close to $200,000. It's like, well, that's quite a bit. Now, the other thing I want to point out is that thing in the back that you called a robot is as much a robot as your Roomba. Okay. So the technical definition of robot, it has to have at least 3 degrees of freedom, and it's not clear that thing in the back even needs 3 degrees of freedom. The other thing is it's more like a piece of hard automation, because it's always picking up and dropping off at the same location. Because it's seeing those trays are always coming in the same place. So it really is just kind of going back and forth and back and forth. It is not that easy to program to do a different task. So that's why we typically would not call that a robotic arm, even though it looks kind of like an arm.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, I'm having issues with playing this back, but actually, before we do that, let's go on to the posts, because this is new stuff. So both of us, you with Herbert and me on my own, did a video about this that'll be yesterday when people see this one. So we've already talked somewhat about the video, but we have Dr. Jim Fan, who works at the Gear Lab at NVIDIA, in fact, heads the Gear Lab. Very kindly, it's really cool to see the collegiality with all this stuff. Says, congrats to Tesla Optimus team on another stellar update. The video gives us a peek at their human data collection farm, which I believe is Optimus's biggest lead. What does it take to build such a pipeline? Optimus nailed all the following, and then I'll post the link in the description because it's long. So there, I mean, the TLDR, hands are among the 5 best finger hands. Teleoperation, sizable fleet, task and environment. This is important though down here, because I agree with this. I actually posted in a response to Jim. But closing thought, teleoperation is necessary but insufficient condition to solve humanoid robots. It fundamentally does not scale, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But Elon responded to that. Where is it? New Optimus hand later this year will have 22 degrees of freedom. I posted here that, you know, I thought they would need simulation, which they definitely have. Some sort of contrastive learning thing, which would allow you to do text to action, and then third-party observation in the sense of either videos or watching somebody from far away do a task, right? So rather than having to be embedded and teleoperated, it would be able to see what was going on. So that's the kind of stuff. But this was a really big post. later this year we'll have 22 degrees of freedom. We can talk more about that in a second. But then he responded to Sawyer, who he's following again, by the way, and said, and the actuators will move almost entirely into the forearm, just like how humans work. So let's start with that, because I know you were super excited about that, Scott, and you've talked about this quite a bit in the past. So yeah, we can start with the tendons in the forearm and all. Well, where are they right now? Where are the actuators in the hand right now? Best guess.
Okay, so the first thing is that whenever an Optimus video drops, you want to be the warm take and not the hot take, because you need to wait an hour or two before Milan then add some context to what was just
and we're going to get that. We're going to get that.
And then when you have then Elon coming through and adding these things, and it turns out you end up reading these things after you've already had your hot take. So the first thing is I had to read that very carefully what he said. He said, the Optimus hand, not hands, will have 22 degrees of freedom. So I'm going to attempt to put my camera back on here, because we turned it off just to make sure the audio quality would be better while we're traveling.
Yeah. We were having some awful
and then
problems,
if we want, we can kind of look at what's going on with the hands right now. So we have 11 degrees of freedom currently in the Optimus Bot. And we want to be careful to distinguish the difference between the degrees of freedom. Right. So there's 6 actuators. So there's 6 independently controlled motors that result in what you have is 11 degrees of freedom of motion. So basically, their fingers have 2 knuckles as opposed to the 3 knuckles that we have. So one actuator causes the finger to curl, which makes 2 of the knuckles curl simultaneously. So you cannot control each knuckle independently. You can just make the whole thing go. So that's the difference between sort of 6 degrees of 6 actuators versus degrees of freedom that can move. And they're currently done using tendons with actuators that are actually in the palm. They're embedded in the palm to fit down there. Okay.
Which gives you a really, really thick palm.
Right. So the movement that they have is that each finger, in effect, has 2 degrees of freedom because it only has 2 knuckles, and it's just able to do this. They're just able to curl up and move around. The thumb is the same thing. It has 2, but it has a second actuator that allows it to move back and forth like this. Now, we've talked about with the hand that Optimus cannot do this. It cannot move the fingers out to either play the piano or do the Vulcan live long and prosper salute. So they suddenly doubled it. They've gone from 11 to 22. How are they coming up with the extra ones? Well, more than likely, they've added another knuckle. So if you think about it, they've gone from 11 to 22. They've doubled the degrees of freedom per finger, if you sort of think about it that way.
Yeah.
So that means they've gone from 2 degrees of freedom per finger to 4. They've added a knuckle, which goes us from 2 to 3. And they've added this motion. So that means you've got 4 degrees of freedom per finger, and that means you've got 16 here now.
Right.
And now we've got to come up with, well, then we get the thumb. What's the thumb going to do? Well, it's already got a certain amount of motion there. There's already got 2 degrees of freedom. Maybe they're adding another knuckle there to it. And then I'm not sure if there's any other movement you can get there, but I suspect what they're having to do is add something in the palm. Because the human palm kind of is a bit soft and scrunchy, right? Right now, because the actuator's in there, the palm is very, very hard. It cannot move.
Right.
So they may put something in there that allows you to have what is almost like another knuckle for all the fingers to collapse down. Right. It's really, I can get myself up to like 20 or 21 degrees of freedom. I'm thinking, well, where's the 22nd one coming from? Because that seems to be way too many. Now, supposedly the human hand has about 27 degrees of freedom, but that's including the wrist, which they already have in there. So now what Elon followed up, he says they're moving the actuators back into the forearm. And that would sort of make sense, because if you look at the Optimus forearm, the way they designed it, they do have some empty space in that forearm that they could fill in with some actuators if you pack it right. And the way the wrist is designed, you could easily run tendons through there. So that wrist movement mechanism would allow you to run some sheaths through there that would have the tendons that go out to the finger. So you're not radically changing the way the fingers are moving, except we're adding some extra knuckles. I wonder if they're going to be changing the lengths of the fingers, whether they're all going to be the same length or if they're going to modify that as well. That's really going to be the big question, because Elon has talked about more human-like. Well, if you want to be more human-like, then you better get the same kind of curvature of the fingers that you typically would see there. And he said most of them are going to be there, so they may still have one somewhere in here, and which I don't think would necessarily prevent you from being able to get some flexure in the palm, but it'll probably be there. So most of them are going to be back, and the question is, how clever they're going to be on that. So it may be okay. It's got 22 degrees of freedom now.
Let me ask you about humans first. So
yes.
This way. Anyway, when I pull down on this finger, there are effectively little pulleys that hold the tendon in place. But effectively, it's pulling the whole thing down, right? It's very difficult to just move this knuckle. So, I mean, it's the same thing a human finger does because it's all these tendons in the forearm that are pulling it.
With a lot of concentration, you can try to do it and not get in there, but it really hurts. I mean, you really typically you don't have that control. It's like you just grasp like that, and that's about like 99%. And there's like some really weird situations where maybe you try to do something a little bit differently. Now, we have to remember 6 actuators, 11 degrees of freedom. 22 degrees of freedom does not necessarily mean they're putting in 12 new, 6 more actuators. They're going to have 12. I'm not sure how they're going to do it. Maybe they want to have one actuator which causes the fingers to go like this together, not individually splay out like this, but maybe they add one more actuator for that or for some of the other movements. So remember. Probably 4 or 5 of those movements is adding an additional knuckle. You don't need an actuator for that. It's just to make sure your fingers curve better. Who else has a finger with that many knuckles? Do you remember who?
Well, I know Sanctuary does because they got great
Sanctuary does. I think they're the only one that does. All the others have sort of chosen to throw away one of the knuckles as well for kind of the same reason. It's like, do we need it or not? So it's rather curious and decided to go that way. You would only add that to your hand if you're really thinking of way more dexterous type of manipulation.
Right.
Going beyond what seems to be simple factory work.
I will throw something in because the reason why I believe that Sanctuary can do it now, of course, they use hydraulics, right? For the
hydraulics, yes.
Yeah. But once you put tendons into the hand, the difference between this 2 of these and 3 of these is not that much because it's just a place. It's just you just create a pulley essentially in a spot where it can just curl. So you create more compliance because I imagine the beautiful part about cables is that they have compliance naturally because they're long and thin. And so as you press on something, it will comply and it'll create the right resistance so you don't break an egg or something as you try to pick it up. So once you've got it, it just seems logical to just add the extra dimension. Why not? And they may, and Jordy, I'm sure Jordy probably looked at this morning and said, yeah, they're copying us again. Because he made a note. We were on Best in Tesla, actually, just in Lars's thing today. And he pulled out the part where Jordy was saying like, yeah, we've been working on this and clearly Tesla copied us. So he's probably going to be, brushing off his shoulder again today going like, yeah, they copied us again. They decided to go 3 knuckles instead of 2.
Now, what I want you to think about is that if there's like work that you have to do with wearing bulky work gloves, then the Optimus hand as it is perfectly good. Yeah. So if you are looking like these are the kind of jobs I have to do where, just these bulky work gloves that take away a lot of the feel and dexterity. But if there's a lot of operations where you don't need to wear gloves, that actually, wearing gloves makes it very difficult, then you need a hand that's going to have the full degrees of freedom and control. So that's kind of one way of break it down. It doesn't mean they're going to, if this hand is really cheap to produce, then maybe all the Optimi have it. But if it's like it's a bit more expensive, it's like, well, this would just be an upgrade option, depending upon the operations you have. The question is how difficult it's going to be to have different training sets for that. So if it's really complicated, it's like, well, we're training it one for this or one for that, then no, let's forget about it. Let's just go with one hand. So we don't have the difficulty. Like we were already seeing, Cybertruck doesn't have FSD for a reason, right?
Yeah. Hey, man.
Doesn't have the training set yet.
Speaking of patting yourself on the shoulder, I did that because there were a lot of people who were like, they were willing to bet me the farm. I wish I'd bet some Tesla shares. I would have been rich. So the other thing about this is, and the reason I keep bringing this up is specifically the forearm. So where are the actuators? So if you've just got the tendons running through the fingers, you can make the palm much, much smaller because it doesn't have to have actuators in it. But where are you going to place the actuators in? Because you've already got those 2 big linear drives that allow the wrist to move.
But I think there's probably going to be some space that they can take in there to move it back instead of the white area. They might be able to embed something in there. And who knows? They may have some other trick up their sleeve. Another pun. Of the actuators may be, much smaller right now. I mean, they may be coming up with a really clever way to be able to do that kind of actuation that is not anything we've thought of. And that, maybe with like simple little clutches on a single shaft actuator that's rotating. They could engage the movement of different tendons. So it may be you could get more degrees of freedom or control of more degrees of freedom than you think of with fewer motors. And we've seen sort of examples of people working on things like that. If you also think about it, if you want to make a mechanical analog of an hydraulic system, you've got one big pump which creates all the force and the energy of what you need. But then you have these tiny valves that you open and close that control the movement of the fluid or the air through to where you need to get it to actuate where you want. Those things are really tiny compared to the other thing. So imagine if you have some other way of being able to engage the movement of these tendons back and forth on one other type of actuator. So, and the other thing to remember is they moved those actuators. Remember, they angled those actuators a little bit out to give them some, to make it a little bit more slender in the wrist. Well, by doing that, I think they also bought them some space in the back a little bit, because they probably moved it out. So that may give them a little bit more room. Also, the way that wrist is designed, it's really easy to run those tendons through there. If you look at some of the other wrists that were designed.
I was just going to ask you about that, because running the tendons through and allowing the tendons to operate properly when the wrist is, rolled around and stuff that's not trivial.
It's like, it's basically going to be like bicycle brakes. You're going to have a sheath that allows these things to sort of run through to control them in a way. And it's very easy there because the wrist is very open and easy to go through. If you look at some of the other bot designs that stack together 3 actuators in a row to be able to get that movement, it's not so easy. So, they can do that. And I think they're well aware that that's one of the reasons they built the wrist the way they did.
I will add to that, though, that there's a complexity, because as you twist the wrist, even if it's inside of a sheath, all of the cable lengths change, which means that the actuators have to be accounting for the position of the wrist
a little bit. But
remember that's cool, because you've got a neural network that's thinking.
Yeah, but remember, the roll of the wrist is way back. It's back. The roll of the wrist is back at the elbow.
It's actually locked here, so it's
yes. So that's the beauty of that. So it is kind of locked there, but you still have to account for the fact that when you pitch your wrist up and down or go back and forth, that also is going to be changing the length of potentially the length of those things. But again, I think it's going to be a bit like your bicycle brakes, the way you run the sheath around there. So long as that length doesn't change, it may not have any impact. But that's why you have a neural net. If we were to write that heuristically, it would be really hard for us to come up with the math to figure all that out.
Exactly. Oh man, it would be, what a nightmare. Which brings us actually to Milan, because this is, what a segue we got. Man, it's like we did this on purpose somehow. We did not. Okay. Over the past couple of months, Milan Kovac, head of, what's his title? I can never remember their titles. Let's see. Optimus TeslaBot Engineering. Well, there you go. That's what you got. Over the past couple of months, our awesome manufacturing team has built more bots for us to work on and collect AI data from. Good job with the AI data. We've trained and deployed a neural network allowing Optimus to start doing useful tasks, such as picking up battery cells, which we just saw, coming down a conveyor and precisely inserting them into a tray. The neural network is running entirely end-to-end, meaning that it only consumes video coming out from the bot's 2D cameras, as well as onboard proprioceptive sensors, which is these guys, and produces joint control sequences directly. It runs entirely on the bot's embedded FSD computer powered by the onboard battery. It is designed such that a single neural network can perform multiple tasks as we add more diverse data to the training process. I'll get back to that in just a minute. Well, not perfect yet and still a little slow. We're seeing increasingly high success rates with less frequent misses, which is cool. We're also training Optimus to recover from failure cases, as we saw with the one battery that was misplaced, and are seeing spontaneous corrections happen, which is even cooler. We've deployed a couple of bots at one of our factories, which are being tested daily at the real workstations and continuously improving. Optimus also now regularly takes walks across the office without falling. Further work is ongoing to make it move faster, as well as dealing with more adverse terrains, all without sacrificing the human-like nature of it. We're also focusing on repeatability across the fleet, training the neural network to deal with the dynamic calibration and small bot-to-bot variants. More updates soon. That bottom part was exactly, so the segue was all the way to the bottom of this, but that idea that when you're mass manufacturing something, the tolerances are, half a millimeter or some whatever, but all of those tiny little distance changes, if you have a dumb bot, that means that you miss, if you think about that multiplied by multiple joint chains, it could miss by a couple of millimeters, the thing that it's supposed to be going for. And that can cause big problems because it's perfect for one bot, not for the next bot. And
they're never perfect. Even the industrial robots, they try as hard as they can to make them identical. Then they were the same, which is why you measure them. So they go through a calibration sequence that creates what's called a signature file to account for all those errors. And even then, those errors drift or change over time. So think about it, if you have tendons, it's very difficult to make all the tendons exactly the same length, the same tension, and everything else. It's really, really hard. And then even if you do that, over time, they're going to stretch and change for each bot. So you need to do this calibration, not just to go from bot to bot, but also with the bot. So that bot is going to start to drift over time. So it has to be able to understand how it's changed. And that's something that the neural networks can do. So
I think the bicycle analogy is perfect again, because if you've ever had a 10-speed bike where you have the cable that runs to your derailleur, and over time that cable just stretches because it gets old, and then your derailleur is like, it doesn't click right into the right place.
And I know they're using Kevlar and everything else, but it doesn't matter. I mean, they're just, these things are still going to have a certain bit of stretch. They're not going to be identical from one to the other. If you have to do any sort of service on the thing, you've probably messed up the calibration right there. You have to recheck it. And so that was like really interesting, because he starts at the top talking about proprioception, which is a very important key to them solving the problem of deployability across the fleet. He also mentions a lot about the wanting to get the reliability and repeatability in multiple workstations, which Julian Ebart's also kind of followed up on in his own post about that, of confirming that yes, they're putting in multiple places. They're concerned about reliability. They're able to run, many hours. I think maybe set up to 4 hours at least doing that operation. So, really being able to test out the capabilities of the bot to work nonstop. But they're mainly concerned about reliability. And, one of them is being able to walk for a long time without falling down. Now, we take for granted as humans, we rarely fall down, especially if we're on a good surface. If you throw down a banana peel, or if you're on something icy, I'm going to slip and fall. But if you really think about it, the last couple of times that you've probably tripped, you tripped because there was something in the way that you tripped over. It's not that you were just kind of clumsy, that you're walking down a perfect hallway, perfect carpeting and everything else, and just like, fell over. That's a very rare occurrence for any of us. And it needs to be the same thing for the bots. And getting it to walk around in the office, or at least to have the confidence that is showing they're starting to attack on a lot of nines right there as far as that reliability.
Yeah. And also Dr. Jim Fan from NVIDIA's Gear Lab talked about simulation and injecting noise into the simulation. I'm going to do a whole video on that. And actually, if you want to join me for that video, so outside the scope of today, but it connects to Optimus here, because they're specifically talking about down at the bottom here that dynamic calibration and small bot to bot variance is effectively that thing. And that increases robustness of a neural network to have it train across a range. So you get a distribution. It understands how to deal with out of bounds or edge of bounds situations. So really, really cool. So, collecting data, obviously.
So John, I have to ask you, do you recalibrate every morning when you get up?
I don't know. When I stretch and stuff, do you think it's like a recalibration? I don't think I do, but
your body is constantly recalibrating, because our proprioception is constantly changing, because our muscles atrophy or they strengthen, and all sorts of things happen. Of course, when we were growing, our lengths were changing. So talk about the tolerances going out of whack. So we've got a natural way to be able to adapt to that without even thinking about it. And that's what's going on here, is that you put all that noise in there, and it's designed to be robust. So in a sense, the neural network's not even thinking about the calibration problem. It's just inherent. It's almost like an emergent behavior.
Yeah. The deal with neural networks is you don't want them to overfit. So let's say that we only had one Optimus, and we just trained it, and we had it doing 100 tasks perfectly with that one. That's never going to work. That won't scale out to a bunch. So you want dozens or 100 of these that are all just a little bit different because they come off the line a little differently. You train them all to do the same task, and then it starts to get robust, because then it's like, okay, I understand how to do this across a range of different parameters, even on a colder versus a hot day, depending on what kind of materials you're using. There could be expansion and contraction. So if it went out and walked in the snow, everything could get a little bit more.
Even humidity affects things. I mean,
everything. So yeah, let's read this blue highlighted chapter. Sorry, I didn't bring this up before. I thought I had, but anyway, the neural network is running entirely end to end. So this is going to sound exactly like full self-driving because it literally is, meaning it only consumes video coming from the 2D cameras, which are around the bot's head, as well as onboard proprioceptive sensors, which would be the same thing as the car's IMU, which is the inertial measurement unit, but much more sophisticated because it's the fingers and it's the body positioning, all of that kind of stuff it understands. And out of that, it produces joint control sequences directly, which means like you can think of it as words. It's like move here, move here, move here, move here, that kind of a thing. But the cool part is it runs entirely on the, and I noticed that he made a very specific point about this. It runs entirely on the bot's embedded FSD computer powered by the onboard battery. And it's designed such that a single neural network can perform multiple tasks as we add more diverse data into the training process. So that just means it can learn. But the important part here, and the little jab at particularly figure, I'm sure, is that they're saying all of this stuff is running on board on Optimus. It's not being offloaded. And so when you saw that figure demo, you could see that it did the little OpenAI thinking bubble, because what it was doing was sending off the request to the cloud for OpenAI to like give it information, and then it came back. Now, I'm sure all of the actual motions were being done on the bot.
That's all local. Yep.
Yeah, that's all local because it has to be. It has to have very fast reaction time, or else it's just going to fall over. But it was a clear jab. But the funny thing is that I haven't seen any evidence that TeslaBot can accept verbal commands, either typed in or spoken. So
correct.
So don't go complaining about OpenAI and this little side jab there if you're not able to do it yourself. So maybe they can, and they just haven't talked about it yet. I don't know. But anyway, but very interesting stuff. Very cool. What Milan is talking about.
Now
here.
they've been using Optimus in other places down in automation, and so we've only seen one example, which is probably the simplest one, and be very easy to criticize, saying, well, that's not very impressive. It's not very fast. It's not walking very fast. And of course, Milan addressed that, saying that they're working more on reliability and they'll be able to make it go faster over time. And part of that might just be that the neural networks need to improve a little bit to be able to improve the speed, or there may be some other reasons. I don't think it's mechanical reasons. I don't necessarily think it's power reasons, but that could be one potential reason, is like, well, we don't want to exceed our allotment of 500 watts or something like that to be able to go faster. We need to find another way. But again, it's probably doing that is optimizing too soon.
Right.
And that eventually they hope to get those speeds, and they're going to need to in some ways. But it sounds like they're confident they're able to get those speeds, that it's almost like intentional that they're kind of keeping it back because they're more focused on being able to get this end-to-end working reliably. And of course, we see that they're doing tasks that also look like household tasks because they want something that's a very diverse training set. No doubt about that.
Right. Yeah, I was going to get to the teleoperation. I'm having problems with, for some reason, the controls are not working well. But once we get to the teleoperation, I counted 8 TeslaBots there that I could see at stations, and one.
I think someone thought there might have been around a dozen. And of course, Milan did say that, hats off to the manufacturing team for, producing these others. So it seems like they're able to put them at scale. The other thing is, he did mention in kind of like various automation that they're doing. And my train of thought was like, they showed us the lowest of the low hanging fruit because they don't want us to really see what it's doing. So I have a feeling they're sandbagging us a little bit here on what it is actually performing. So it's sort of an indication that when we finally show you what it's doing down there, you will be blown away.
Right. So just real quick, you can see that there's guys with VR helmets on. I assume that what is TeslaBot is 5'8", and I know they were hiring people who are 5'8".
All I know is that all those people you see wearing black are somewhere between 5'7" and 5'11" tall.
Exactly, because they had that was the call. It was like the NASA thing. You had to have the right stuff. You had to be the right height. So anyway, but you can see them all wearing this. They're wearing a VR helmet and some sort of haptic glove things. You can also see that they have 2 haptic gloves on. So just for those people who are like, they're not training the left hand, it's like, well, maybe not in this instance, but he definitely has a left hand. But you can see the TeslaBots are imitating what the humans are doing. So this is the way that they're obviously learning. We don't know if they're learning in more sophisticated ways than this. Teleoperation, very efficient because you're teaching it the exact motion. This is so weird looking. But then over here, this one, oh man, I was like, is it folding laundry? Because if it's freaking folding laundry, that's I want to.
That'll be something else.
right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
So it looks
now,
like it's a basket, and there's a bookshelf or something where it's putting things in a
mhm.
shelf. So it's not just picking batteries. So yeah, there's other things going on here.
Now, one of the things that Jim Fan talked about was that for the
Right.
teleoperation, the biggest problem is lagging.
Yes.
So if what the teleoperator is seeing is really lagging on the response of the bot, it's really hard to do those things. So if you can get
Exactly.
that lag down, then it's a lot easier. And that's very important because then it means you can start training a lot more and then you're going
Right.
to have a much better training set. But if you're constantly trying to compensate for the fact that you're lagging and you're overshooting or undershooting and having to do it again and again, well, that's what the bot's going to learn, right? To be
Right.
hesitant and not very good at it. So he seems, he's assuming, I can't really tell from the video because we're not really seeing a one-to-one between what the operator is doing and what the bot is doing,
Right.
that
Right.
if that lag is not perceptible, then it makes the training more feasible. And
Right.
again, like he said, it's one important deal. You need to have a lot of other ways of being able to do the training.
Right. Yeah. So yes. So for sure, I would assume that they will at least have observational training. And I would be, I can't imagine that they're not using Grok to do text-based training as well, which is pick up the batteries and put them in the tray. Like
Yes.
even with the teleoperated one, I would imagine they're injecting text into these training samples so that the text is flowing into it. It's like put the batteries into the tray. That is then being teleoperated. So it's associating those text tokens, the words, with that operation so that in the factory you can just
Right.
tell it that. Yeah, you don't have to do that anymore. So I wanted to quickly look at walking because I think we can really, really observe. And I know your connection's not going to be great, so you probably won't be able to observe this as well. But we're going to be able to see what you were calling the Gibbs overshoot, I guess, or but it's basically damped harmonic oscillation.
It's what's known as the Gibbs. It's the Gibbs phenomenon in control theory.
Exactly. And I am actually
the
related
overshoot
to
is known as the Gibbs phenomenon. Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, but watch as he comes around corners. This corner, you'll see him oscillate like this. And if you've ever driven full self-driving, especially the older versions 10 and 11, it has a lot of oscillation like that. So what it's doing is it's overshooting, right? You were just talking about that. It overshoots the angle or something, and then it corrects back, but it overshoots, then it corrects back and it overshoots, and it just kind of, it oscillates into the proper mean, but it takes a while. And so you'll watch as it comes around the corner here. Maybe it's this one or maybe it's the next one. Yeah, so you could see it right there. It's a little subtle, but if I can get this thing to back up, hopefully if you watch it, you'll see it kind of going like this, especially when it's at high speed. You see it kind of oscillating down the hallway. So here, and he kind of overshoots a little, and then yeah, there's just so anyway, it may be a little difficult to tell when it's at on the connection that you've got, but it really is interesting as it goes around corners. There's just a little bit of oscillation with it. So I'm not complaining about this, just saying it's a really interesting observation to watch the fact that it's you can see how it's learning and how it's getting better. And of course, over time, what it will do is damp that out so that you won't see it anymore at all. It'll just be perfect. Like a person. I mean, when you get a new driver, a lot of times, I mean, your son is driving. When he first learned to drive, I'm sure he did a lot of overcompensation where he would drive and then turn too far and then have to compensate back, and you get that sort of weird motion. So yeah, it's that sort of learning behavior. But
right, and as you get better and better, you learn how to kind of cut those things or to be correct a little bit sooner. And again, I think the analogy we can use for telerobotics or something like that is that if you're very groggy or if you're under the influence, if you're drunk or something like that, you have a hard time because your hands and your motor skills are now kind of messed up because you've introduced a kind of a lag. And that's almost the same thing, is that it's not getting the feedback quite quick enough to be able to realize that it's about to overshoot and that it needs to start making a slight change to its course earlier to be able to actually hit the line that it wants to go on.
Right. So, yeah, but pretty impressive stuff going on here. I don't know what else we got. Anything else? I think people are going to be underwhelmed by this, although I feel like this should have the ChatGPT moment of the figure Keurig thing because of what's coming up in just a second here. When we do the POV and we see it autocorrect itself,
Yes.
That's the same thing that we saw with the Keurig cup, which blew people's minds. So maybe it's because it's not the first one, so everyone will be like, oh yeah, we already saw Figure do this, but it's not, it's that right there, right here, where it's like picking it up
Yep.
and going like, yep, let's place that in the
That's
proper
not
place.
right. Yep.
Yeah.
And if that's an emergent behavior, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. It is very cool. So whoops, it just went to TeslaBot. So it's a really impressive behavior going on here. If people are like, yeah, whatever, it's not that big a deal. Remember that this thing is also standing. A lot of the other bots, including Phoenix, are standing on like some sort of a stationary thing or on a wheeled platform. This is actually balancing itself while it does this. And again, that's not completely simple either, because it's changing its center of mass as it's moving around. So these are
and that's where you get the big debate. It's like, well, then if it's just standing there, why does it need legs in the first place? And it's just going to kind of go back and forth. And it might be because, well, that's just a very temporary thing. It just has to go there. It's going to do it, and then it needs to deploy somewhere else and deploy somewhere else. So you may need mobility. And if all you need is like a little bit of mobility, it doesn't have to walk that fast. So that the speed might be sufficient, but you do want the idea that it is deployable. And in some cases, you might be in narrow confines, which is the reason why you might want to be legged. Because we've heard some pushback from some of the other CEOs on whether legs make sense or not. Most of them believe so. Gordy does not. He thinks that in many cases you do not really need mobility, and if you do, it's as simple as wheels, and that legs may be overkill. So.
And if we go all the way to the other end, it talks about needing legs as manipulators, not as being able to walk.
They manipulate the ground. That's the way he looks at it.
And or to like jam your knee into a cupboard or something as you're trying to like do something, right? You use your appendages to do things, to manipulate objects with. So he's very much about that. Yeah.
Yes, and now if you look, depending on where you are, if you're looking at manufacturing lines which are set in a particular way, the way they're organized, you might say, oh, just a wheeled vehicle is going to be good enough. But if you want a bot to operate in your kitchen, having it on wheels just doesn't work, because as Bernd was saying, a lot of times you're needing to lean up on something to grab something in the far cupboard or do something else. And I liked his analogy of saying, no, the legs are manipulating the ground.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not really for transportation. They're a way of getting our balance, being able to pivot and everything else. So they're very important to the overall function of the bot and there's human workscape.
There's only two ways to do wheels. One is to have like a wheelchair, like a wide base, which is wider than the bot, which means it doesn't fit like in your kitchen. It's just not going to fit. Like it's going to be very awkward. Or the other option is to have like a very, very small wheel, but to have to segue it and have to balance all the time, at which point you're solving the same problem as having legs. Right. You're just the same. It's just a wheel. It's like a single point of contact.
And even the Segway has a pretty big kind of, footprint, if you want to look at it, compared to a normal, human feet. So it also takes up more space and is not quite as well suited a solution. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and again, the world is designed for us, for primarily people with two arms and two functioning legs, and we get around. And if you want a robot, I think the problem that I'm really feeling a lot of people are mistaking this. They keep going like, well, a specialty robot could do this job better. And in a lot of cases it could.
In every case they can. Yes, absolutely. Every case they can.
It's how much is it going to cost? That's the question.
And how much you use it. So again, especially a robot can do it better, but it's only being used 30 minutes of the day. Wow, that's a lot of stranded capital doing absolutely nothing.
Well, let's take an extreme example of let's say you bought a kitchen bot that was amazing and it could cook. Well, how it's the most is going to cook 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? And that's assuming you're home for all the meals. That's a lot of money not being amortized over very much action by the robot. Wouldn't it be better to have a robot that could go to the store and buy you your food and then come home and cook it and also clean the house?
That's the whole idea. That's the whole idea. If it's doing one activity and it's doing it at high speed all the time, then you want specialization. But you really need a generalist. And the other thing to think about is that there's a lot of activities we do that require us moving around on our legs. But there's also a lot of activities we do during the day where we do not need our legs.
Yes.
And what do we do when we do that, John? What are you doing right now?
I'm sitting. You're sitting.
You're sitting. There's no reason why Optimus could not also be sitting.
Yeah.
So many of those situations, it can suddenly say, oh, we don't need the legs. Rather than balancing on the legs, we can have a special stool for Optimus to sit on, and that's it. And then, potentially charge at that time if it doesn't need to be moving around. So there's no reason why the bots have to stand if they are not needed to, they don't need to be mobile at that point. But they can instantly switch to mobility very quickly, but just by getting it moving around like we do. So there may be a business for bot office furniture.
Yeah, Opti seats. with a charging plug sticking right up in the middle. Do not sit on the Opti seat, or you will regret.
Yes, exactly. Not rated for humans. Yes,
not rated for humans. The other thing I just want to mention this real quick is there is not a tether in this entire video, as far as I can see.
Right.
Like, how they used to have him tethered to make sure he didn't fall over. Apparently it doesn't fall over, and I guess when it does, it falls in a controlled enough manner that it doesn't break.
Right. And it seems to be pretty reliable because they've put Optimus through a battery of tests.
Oh, there we go. Are we going to have to go out on that? I think we have to go out on that. That's about it. All right, come back on camera for just a minute so we can say goodbye here. I will get you back. Oh, wait, maybe I will. There we go. All right. So I guess on that we're gonna just go ahead and go, because that's the dad joke. I mean, you are the dad in the car right now, so you have to tell dad jokes. That's the way it has to go.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you, Scott, for taking time out of your long commute back to Florida. And everybody, let us know what you think about this. This is really cool. Again, we're not playing favorites here. We love all these bot manufacturers. We just love to see the competition keep going.
And we saw a few people up at Monroe yesterday, and we hope to see those same people again in about a month's time up in Muskegon in Michigan. So it's June 15th, if I recall. I think it's the 15th of June.
Yes, 15th and 16th, or 16th and 17th.
Yeah,
I will leave a link to it.
It's a Saturday around there. Yes. So if you want to go to the Tesla meetup there, it's going to be pretty big. If you're going to Tesla, bring it up, because we want to get that world record for the light show.
Yeah, well, I think we need like 1,000 Teslas up there or something.
Yeah, we're going to need at least 1,000. Yep.
Yeah. So
there's space. There's space for it. We can pull it off.
Yeah.
Just got to come up. Yep.
That'd be cool.
So I'll be there. John will be there.
We've got an artist. Sandy's going to be there. There's a lot of people who are going to be there. It's going to be a big event.
And there's going to be a special musical guest.
Oh, yes. Perhaps someone we might dream of having with us.
Yes. And also, yes, the light show is going to have a special feature in there as well. So definitely come on up.
Yeah. And this is not just any light show. It's artist designed. It's going to be pretty top-notch stuff. So we're very excited. So definitely come up to Muskegon. I hear it's beautiful. I've never been, but I'm very excited about that. And we'll be there. So everybody definitely come and join us. And I don't know, we'll see you in the next video. In the meantime, who knows when Optimus, they're going to drop another TeslaBot video. So
you never know.
We might be back tomorrow. So anyway, we'll see ya. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.